This is part 3 of the integumentary system. Um, in fact, I think, let's go back. I'm sorry. Well, the last page that we were on just asked about why the skin turns red in a light-skinned person when they've been exercising or when they're hot, and it is because the blood vessels close to the surface of the skin, the blood vessels in the dermis, are dilating in order to release heat onto the surface of the skin and then into the atmosphere. And so that makes the surface of the skin appear red. Then moving on to vitamin D3, we know that ultraviolet radiation can be harmful to our skin, but it's also necessary because vitamin D3 stimulates our skin cells, our epidermal cells start over. Ultraviolet radiation stimulates our epidermal cells to produce vitamin D3, and then the liver and the kidneys convert the vitamin D3 into calcitriol. Calcitriol is a hormone that is essential for the absorption of calcium and phosphorus. So you may have been told, if you were told to take a calcium supplement, that you also needed to take, along with the calcium supplement, it should include vitamin D3 and magnesium. Inadequate vitamin D3 can lead to weak and flexible bones because of the effect it has on the absorption of calcium. Now, skin cancer of the epithelial cells is called a carcinoma. The most common skin cancer is basal cell carcinoma. If you think about what cancer is, it is when mitosis has kind of started to go out of control and the cells are dividing faster than they're supposed to, so they form a tumor. And we know that the cells in the stratum basale are dividing. They're actively dividing. So it's very common to have skin cancer called basal cell carcinoma. Very rarely is this deadly. Then there is squamous cell carcinoma that's found in the more superficial layers of the epidermis, which is again pretty easy to have removed. Then there's malignant melanoma, which is extremely dangerous. The melanocytes are the cells that produce melanin, and when they become cancerous, they can metastasize through the lymphatic system. A malignant melanoma does usually begin with a mole, but every mole is not a malignant tumor. This shows you a basal cell carcinoma, which is pretty common and can be removed from the surface without too much scarring, and then a mole that has become cancerous, which is called a melanoma. The advice that dermatologists give, that physicians give, is if a mole changes size or shape, that's when you should have it. You should go to a dermatologist and have it seen. The relationship between sunlight exposure and vitamin D3 synthesis is that the more sunlight exposure you get, the more vitamin D3. It's a direct relationship, and the most common skin cancer is carcinoma. Now we're going to talk about the dermis, which is the layer that is deep to the epidermis. So it's underneath the epidermis. It lies between the epidermis and the hypodermis, and it contains two major layers, the papillary and the reticular layers. And here is a picture showing you the papillary layer is here in this area, and the reticular layer is thicker, and it's in this area. You see a lot more fibers because the reticular layer is dense, irregular connective tissue. The papillary layer is areolar, which is a loose connective tissue. The dermis is named after the dermal papilla and consists of areolar tissue. The papillary layer, the papillary layer of the dermis is named after the dermal papilla, and it consists of areolar tissue which supports and nourishes the epidermis. It contains capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and sensory neurons that supply the skin surface. Then below that, or deep to that, is the reticular layer, which is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. I don't know if you remember, but dense, regular connective tissue is tendons and ligaments. So this layer is very strong and flexible at the same time. The dominant cell type is the fibroblast, which produces the collagen and the elastin that your skin needs, that gives your skin that youthful appearance. Collagen and elastin tend to break down as we get older. Accessory organs derived from the epidermis extend into this layer, and that includes the hair follicles and the sweat glands, the sebaceous glands, which are attached to the hair follicles. The reticular layer contains the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, nerve fibers, and sensory receptors, similar to the papillary layer. The blood vessels, when you have a group of blood vessels or nerves, you call it a plexus. So the cutaneous plexus is the deeper layer that lies along the border of the subcutaneous layer, so between the dermis and the hypodermis. And it supplies adipose tissue or fat tissue in the hypodermis, and it supplies tissues of the integument, the skin. Then there is the subpapillary plexus, which is below the papillary layer of the dermis, and that provides blood to capillary loops along the epidermis-dermis boundary. So it is the more superficial plexus. There's no picture, so let's go back. All right, the subpapillary plexus is located here, as you can see, at the boundary between the papillary layer and the reticular layer. And then the cutaneous plexus has larger blood vessels called arteries and veins, whereas the subpapillary layer is more smaller blood vessels and capillaries. The subcutaneous layer, sub means below, cutaneous means skin. So this layer is called the hypodermis. It is deep to the dermis, which means it is underneath the dermis. It does have fibers intermixed with the dermis. It's not actually part of the integument or integumentary system, but it is included because it stabilizes the position of the skin relative to underlying tissues like muscle. The hypodermis consists of areolar tissue, but it's much more fatty than the papillary layer of the dermis. It is ideal for hypodermic injections, hypodermic needle injections, because it lacks vital organs. Now we'll move on to hair and hair follicles. They are accessory structures of the integumentary system. Hair is non-living keratinized structures produced by hair follicles. So the hair follicle is living. They project above the skin surface everywhere except you do not have hair on the sides and soles of your feet, the palms of your hands, the sides of your fingers and toes, your lips, and portions of the external genital organs. The hair follicle projects into the dermis and usually all the way into the hypodermis. The walls contain all of the cell layers found in the epidermis. So let's review that real quick. The sentence that I like the best is let's get some bait. I actually like the other one better. Sign, don't sign before signing, get legal counsel. I like that one better, but I have to think of it because I learned the layers a long time ago, so I don't really think of the sentences much. I'm sorry for taking so much time with that. But anyway, all those layers found in the epidermis from the stratum basale all the way up to the stratum corneum, um, those same layers are the same layers that are found in the walls of the hair follicle. The epithelial tissue at the base of the follicle forms a cap over the hair papilla. And this is connective tissue that contains capillaries and nerves. The hair matrix surrounds the hair papilla, and it contains epithelial cells that are dividing. So this is where you can get living hair cells for use in DNA testing. And these cells will divide and push the daughter cells toward the surface, and they will eventually become dead. As hair cells move toward the surface, they become keratinized and die, just like the skin. The point where those cells die and become keratinized marks the boundary between the hair root and the hair shaft. The root is the portion that anchors hair into the skin. The shaft is the portion we see on the surface. The structure of the hair shaft consists of 3 layers of dead keratinized cells. The surface layer is the cuticle, which is composed of hard keratin. The middle layer is called the cortex, and the medulla is the core, which contains soft keratin. And here we can see a picture of a hair follicle all the way up to the hair shaft. You can see the hair follicle is this whole, I'm trying to see where it's labeled, but anyway, it's this whole area in the box. This is the hair follicle. Okay, and the hair matrix is here, and the hair papilla is here inside the hair follicle. And then the hair root is going to be below the shaft. And then the hair shaft is going to be the portion that extends out of the skin. And you can see a sebaceous gland is attached to the hair follicle, and that sebaceous gland is going to produce sebum or oil to nourish the hair. And then if you look at a cross section through the follicle, you can see the medulla, the cortex, the cuticle, and then the cells from here to here are the actual follicle cells, which are the same cells that you find in the epidermis from the stratum basale all the way to the stratum corneum. Hair growth cycle, hair can grow for 2 to 5 years at about 0.3 millimeters a day. The follicle will become inactive for the same time frame. 2 to 5 years, not 0.3 millimeters a day. It will become inactive for 2 to 5 years. When new growth cycle begins, the follicle produces new hair. And since this is not happening in every one of your hairs at the same time, that is the reason your hair continues to grow continuously all the time, because some of your hairs are in a different cycle than others. Old hair gets pushed to the surface and shed. Different types of hair in various parts of the body have different growth cycles, and the growth cycles can be affected by general health, hormone levels, or exposure to certain chemicals.